So, you know that feeling of embarrassment that you get when you think about the person that you were 5 years ago and all those naive and misguided thoughts that you used to have? Or, you know that feeling of looking at your past and present self and then imagining how you might construct a better self in the future? Or how about that feeling of frustration that you get when the world doesn't perceive you the way that you want to be perceived? Like, you make a video about art for the internet because you want everybody to think that you're cool and smart, but then everybody watches and they make fun of your voice. That one might just be me. Or similarly, you know that anxiety of the type of person that you know that you want to be, but never quite living up to those standards? You know, the tension between the you that you want to be and the one that actually shows up in the world. The frustration that you'll always be a work in progress pursuing a finish line that probably doesn't exist. Do you know that feeling? What if you could paint that feeling, those feelings? What would it look like? And would it look like trying to eat your own face? So, to explain that last statement, this is Face Eater from a series of paintings by Dana Schutz, who painted them and displayed them in 2003 and 2004. Collectively, these images are known as self-eaters. They are a series of characters who are in the constant state of self-destruction and reconstruction. They eat themselves and then build themselves back up with the resulting feces. The figures take the context that they've been given. They use what they have, their own bodies, and then they create a new self with the raw material in a constant cycle of creation and recreation, an unceasing process of ruination and formation, which we might call personhood. These are, to use the painter's own words, figurative paintings of abstract situations. Schutz is taking that abstract feeling, that productive anxiety I think that we all have about the endless task of self-recreation, of using the material provided by our past selves and trying to make something better from it, and giving it a shape. She's giving a form to that creative energy that is simultaneously destructive. And the form that it takes is somebody eating their own face, or their chest, or their hand, or building a new pair of legs from the digested material. They're unsettling images. They make me uneasy. But at the same time, with those soft colors, they're also kind of beautiful, attractive in the literal sense of that word. The way that they're painted attracts an audience to watch this act of destructive creation. There is a joy in watching this endless recreation of the self. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, or at least painted in soft colors. When discussing the series, Schutz has said that with the self-eaters, they were made out of paint, but they were also made out of their digested selves. They were constantly in a kind of production of themselves. And this highlights for me the existential quality that these paintings have. Existentialism is a philosophy which posits that our existence precedes our essence, meaning we exist before we have a definition or a purpose. Purpose is not something that you are born with. It's a philosophy that states that there is no universal meaning of life. We all individually get to choose our meaning for ourselves. We get to choose what our essential qualities will be, our essence. We have that freedom. But, as the most well-known existentialist once said, man is condemned to be free. We are condemned because that level of freedom is discomforting. It's a lot of responsibility. It's the responsibility to invent yourself and then reinvent yourself when you recognize that your first attempt at self-invention was a failure and it didn't work out the way that you wanted. So now you need to take the residue of that first attempt and try again. And when that doesn't work out the way that you hoped, you'll need to repeat that process again and again and again and again. We are condemned to the process of self-destruction and reconstruction within an uncaring universe that won't give us direction. That's existentialism. And it's also these self-eaters. And now, you might say that this is a fairly solipsistic position. You might say that these characters and these philosophies are self-absorbed, that the focus here isolates the self from the community. There appears to be an ignorance of the outside world and that world's influence on the individual's creative autonomy. These characters pursue their self-creation largely in isolation, and that feels like an inadequate description of the human experience. No one can create their own identity alone, just like no one person can decide the meaning of an artwork. not even the artist. So let's take a broader view of Dana Schutz's work, because I think that will provide more insight into the role that others have during the process of self-creation. In 2002, before the Self-Eaters, Dana Schutz had a show called Frank from Observation. In that show, she imagined the last man on Earth, Frank, and then imagines herself as the last artist on Earth. In this situation, Frank is both the subject and the only audience for the paintings. The artist and Frank, her audience, are free from any other considerations, and they alone negotiate the content and purpose of the painting. So they're alone in their roles, but the process of self-creation, both the definition of Frank as an individual and the definition of artist, is collaborative. The artist makes the paintings that she thinks Frank would want to see given these circumstances. It's a fascinating thought experiment. What would happen to art if an artist only painted for one person, and as part of that artistic project, only needed to respond to that one person's desire to be seen? These images fantasize about a simpler life that would grow infinitely more complex as that audience grows and diversifies. It's a fantasy of a life without the pressure to navigate cultural norms or negotiate that tension between one's identity as both an individual and part of a community. And by isolating that one relationship in these paintings, she calls attention to that dialectic, that conversation between the individual and those who perceive the individual. This thought experiment obviously reveals something about the role of the audience in art and the artistic production of meaning, but it's also part of the human experience of identity construction. We construct our identities for the public through the repeated performance of those identities. And with all that in mind, we might return to the Self-Eaters with the recognition that they're actually not completely alone in their generative acts of self-consumption. They have an audience. We are that audience. I mean, look at them. They all stare directly at us. They're responding to what we want, and as such, we participate in their self-construction, and I, for one, find them both disturbing and oddly beautiful. And doesn't that just sum up humanity? Additionally, after the Self-Eater series, Schutz's characters start building with each other. After consuming parts of their own physical existence in order to rebuild their own bodies, they then begin to sacrifice some of that raw material to engage in the building of a community. These images include groups of characters building and planning together using literal parts of themselves to do it. Like in this painting, called Civil Planning, two figures choose to build something together, a simple stack of rocks, while in the background, a series of binders and body parts are laid out on tables. The plans and the raw materials for building a space to live, implying that self-sacrifice is necessary for living within a community. In other words, as another well-known existentialist once said, to be free is not to have the power to do anything you like. It is to be able to surpass the given towards an open future. The existence of others as a freedom defines my situation and is even the condition of my own freedom. In other words, we get our existential freedom from the freedoms provided to us by others. Dana Schutz, and we, as the audience, permit the Self-Eaters their own creation. They're given the space to do that, and in a painting like Civil Planning, the characters choose to work on a project of community building together, which requires them to recognize each other as free. Additionally, they make these plans for a community on top of a landscape that includes the skeletons of others who engaged in similar projects. The universe might not have opinions on what the purpose of a human life is, but in these paintings, no one tries to solve this problem of meaning alone. These characters create their own purpose by collaborating with each other and with their history. And like those images of Frank, the last man on Earth, this can all be seen as an allegory for art itself. The act of artistic production is the act of self-creation, and the displaying of an artwork participates in a communal project of meaning-making. To say that another way, when Dana Schutz creates a painting, she is also, in a way, creating herself. She's taking something that exists inside her imagination and giving it a physical form. And once she gives it a physical form, others can respond to it in ways that will reveal the content of their imagination. So the Self-Eaters can be viewed as an allegory for this process. They all look out of the painting toward us, the audience, to validate their creative process. They watch us watching them, acknowledging our role in this creative process and the production of meaning. And I find this idea particularly engaging within the 21st century context. Our most visible artists, our celebrities, constantly call attention to their self-production as part of their artistic project. Like, if the making of the self is a generative, creative act within an uncertain universe, then we can think of a human life as an artistic act, particularly the public human life. It's Beyoncé writing the narrative of her past in an act of self-recreation on Lemonade. It's Taylor Swift cannibalizing her relationships and personal life to create an image of Taylor Swift and then destroying that version of herself to create a new Taylor Swift in an infinite production of Taylor Swift eras. Digesting one's own life is the prerequisite for generative artistic production. They're self-eaters. And those two are just better at it than everybody else, but we are all self-eaters with our social media profiles. We consume our lives while simultaneously thinking about how we might reframe that experience of our lives for our friends or followers or whatever we want to call them. As we curate our image online, we are aware of how our lives and selves will appear to others. We watch ourselves being watched as we create ourselves, just like those self-eaters. The self-eaters and the reformers and the planners are all figurative paintings of this abstract process of meaning-making. Figurative paintings of this abstract tension between our identity as individuals with our freedom to make our own meaning and our identity as members of a community that will influence and participate in that construction of meaning. They're paintings of that space between our curated public-facing self and the individual who struggles to make that facade a reality, or the desire to pull down and destroy that facade altogether. It's the desire to eat our own face. And that's all I've got for you today. Please consider subscribing or contributing to my Patreon. Thank you for watching.